The cafeteria manager stood frozen at the security monitor. For 9 years, she had been trying to find out who kept secretly paying off children's unpaid lunch balances. Every month, someone walked into the school office, left enough money to erase every debt, and disappeared without asking for recognition. When they finally decided to investigate, they never expected the person behind it to be the quiet janitor who arrived before sunrise every single day. What happened next changed an entire town forever. At exactly 4:17 every morning, long before the first school bus appeared on Maple Street, Daniel Brooks unlocked the side entrance of Lincoln Elementary with an old brass key attached to a faded blue lanyard. The school was silent. Only the humming fluorescent lights and the distant buzz of the heating system greeted him. Daniel liked it that way. The silence never judged him. It never asked why a man in his late 50s worked 2 jobs and still drove a rusty pickup truck older than many of the teachers. It never noticed that his work boots had been repaired so many times the leather looked like a patchwork quilt. Or that every lunch break, instead of eating in the staff lounge, he quietly drank coffee from the same chipped thermos he'd owned for nearly 15 years. He swept hallways. Polished classroom floors. Fixed broken desks. Changed light bulbs. Cleared snow in winter. Repaired playground equipment in spring. There wasn't a single corner of Lincoln Elementary that Daniel hadn't quietly cared for. Yet most students simply called him Mr. Brooks. And somehow, every child knew he would stop whatever he was doing if they needed help. One rainy Tuesday, a first grader stood crying outside room 108 because she dropped her favorite stuffed rabbit into a muddy puddle. Daniel disappeared for 20 minutes. When he returned, the rabbit was washed, dried with paper towels, and wearing a tiny blue ribbon he'd somehow found in the lost and found box. "It's smiling again," the little girl whispered. Daniel smiled. "So are you." That was enough. He never expected thanks. Across the hallway, teachers often joked that Daniel knew every child's name before learning their parents. It wasn't far from the truth. He remembered birthdays. Favorite sports. Which children loved dinosaurs. Who was afraid of thunderstorms. Who needed extra encouragement before spelling tests. Most importantly, he remembered which children quietly skipped lunch because their cafeteria accounts were empty. He never mentioned it. He simply noticed. Because once, long ago, he had been one of those children. 48 years earlier, Daniel had stood in another cafeteria holding a tray with trembling hands. The lunch lady looked down at her clipboard. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You owe $6. The boy behind him laughed. "So you're too poor to eat?" Daniel slowly returned the tray. He still remembered the smell of warm bread. The mashed potatoes. The chicken soup. Most of all, he remembered pretending he wasn't hungry. That afternoon, his 4th grade teacher quietly placed half her sandwich on his desk without saying a word. No lecture. No pity. Just kindness. He never forgot it. Not once. Life hadn't been easy since then. His father passed away when Daniel was 16. College became impossible. Instead, he worked construction. Then factory work. Then maintenance. He married the love of his life, Sarah. For 23 wonderful years, they built a simple but happy life. Then cancer arrived without warning. By the time Sarah passed away, nearly every dollar they had saved had disappeared into hospital bills. Daniel sold their house. Moved into a tiny apartment. Picked up evening shifts cleaning office buildings. Most people assumed he worked so much because he had no family. The truth was, he worked because he had made Sarah one final promise. "If I ever have enough, I'll make sure no child goes hungry the way we did." Every Friday after cashing his paycheck, Daniel followed exactly the same routine. He paid rent. Utilities. Gas. Bought groceries. Set aside enough for medicine. Then he folded whatever remained into a plain white envelope. Sometimes it was $20. Sometimes 50. Occasionally 100. Every few months, after saving enough, he walked into Lincoln Elementary's administrative office just before closing. He waited until no parents were nearby. Then quietly slid the envelope across the counter. For student lunch balances. The secretary always asked the same question. Would you like a receipt? Daniel always gave the same answer. No, thank you. And your name? It doesn't matter. Then he'd smile politely. And leave. The office staff assumed he was simply another anonymous donor. None of them realized it was always the same man. Year after year. Without fail. For 9 years. Then everything changed. A new principal arrived. Her name was Victoria Reynolds. 45 years old. Harvard educated. Known throughout the district for increasing school funding and improving academic performance. She believed in transparency. Organization. Documentation. When reviewing financial reports during her second month, one line immediately caught her attention. Anonymous lunch balance donations. 9 consecutive years. Nearly $87,000. No donor records, she asked. The office manager shook her head. They always refuse recognition. Victoria frowned. Always. Every single time. Something didn't make sense. People who donated that much money usually left a foundation name. A business. Some tax paperwork. This donor left. Nothing. Not even a signature. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Find out who they are. The office manager hesitated. I don't think they want to be found. Victoria looked again at the total. $87,000. Someone had quietly changed hundreds of children's lives. Without asking for a single thank you. For the first time in her career. Victoria Reynolds became determined to solve a mystery. She had no idea. The answer had been mopping the same hallway outside her office every morning for nearly a decade. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. Daniel had no idea that, by the following Monday morning, 3 people had quietly been instructed to watch him. Not because anyone suspected he had done something wrong. Quite the opposite. Principal Victoria Reynolds wanted to solve the mystery without embarrassing the anonymous donor. She instructed her office manager, cafeteria supervisor, and school resource officer to simply observe. If we discover who it is, she said, we'll thank them privately. None of them imagined where the trail would lead. Monday began like every other. At 4:17 a.m., Daniel unlocked the side entrance. By 5:30, he had already emptied every hallway trash can. By 6:15, he was repairing a loose handrail outside the gym. When the first buses arrived, he stood at the front entrance greeting children. Morning, Tyler. Good luck on your science quiz, Emma. Hey, Marcus. Did your puppy finally learn to sit? The children smiled as if seeing an old friend. Victoria noticed something unusual. Daniel never looked rushed. Every child received his full attention, even if only for a few seconds. She had worked in education for over 20 years. Few adults remembered children's names that well. Daniel remembered nearly all 600 students. Around lunchtime, Victoria decided to observe the cafeteria. The room buzzed with laughter, trays clattering, and conversations bouncing off the walls. Daniel entered carrying a toolbox. He wasn't there to eat. One of the serving windows had a broken latch. He knelt quietly and began repairing it. As he worked, his eyes wandered, not toward the food, but toward the children. He noticed a boy sitting alone. Fourth grader Ethan Miller. Victoria knew Ethan's file. His mother had recently lost her job. His father had left years earlier. The family was struggling. Ethan stared at an unopened carton of milk. No lunch. No sandwich. Nothing. Daniel stood, walked over, and crouched beside him. "Everything okay today, buddy?" Ethan forced a smile. "I'm not really hungry." Daniel recognized the lie instantly. It was the same one he had told decades ago. Without making a scene, Daniel reached into his work apron and pulled out a crisp $5 bill. He folded it twice and slipped it under Ethan's tray. "I dropped this." Ethan looked confused. "No, you didn't." Daniel winked. "Then maybe you found it." The boy hesitated. "I can't take your money." Daniel smiled warmly. "You aren't. You found it." After a long pause, Ethan whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." Daniel nodded once. No child should have to learn on an empty stomach. Then he quietly returned to repairing the latch as if nothing had happened. Victoria watched the entire exchange. There had been no audience. No applause. No attempt to look heroic. Just kindness. Quiet. Intentional. Natural. Something about it stayed with her for the rest of the afternoon. Later that week, heavy rain flooded one corner of the school's playground. Several teachers rushed children indoors while Daniel grabbed a shovel and drainage pump. As he worked in ankle-deep water, a little girl stood nearby crying. "My bracelet. My grandma gave it to me." Without hesitation, Daniel knelt into the muddy water, feeling through thick sludge with his bare hands. 5 minutes passed. 10. Teachers encouraged him to give up. "It's only costume jewelry," one said. Daniel simply kept searching. Finally, he lifted his muddy hand. Wrapped around one finger was a tiny silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. The little girl gasped. "You found it." Daniel carefully rinsed it with a water bottle before fastening it around her wrist. She threw her arms around him. Victoria saw tears forming in the eyes of two teachers. One whispered, "That's just who he is." Curious, Victoria began asking quiet questions. "When did Daniel start working here?" "About 11 years ago." "Has he always been like this?" The school nurse laughed softly. "Always." The librarian added, "He fixes books after school without telling anyone." A third-grade teacher smiled. "He built that reading bench outside with reclaimed wood on his own weekends." Another teacher chimed in. "He buys winter gloves every November and leaves them in the lost and found so kids think someone misplaced them." Every conversation revealed another story. None of them involved recognition. None had ever appeared on social media. Daniel simply helped people because helping people had become part of who he was. Victoria couldn't stop thinking about it. She had spent years attending fundraising dinners where donors expected plaques, speeches, photographs, or buildings named after them. Meanwhile, the school's quiet janitor had been changing lives in complete silence. Friday afternoon arrived. Payday. Daniel followed the same routine he had followed for years. He deposited his check. Paid his rent. Stopped at the pharmacy. Bought groceries. Then sat alone in his pickup truck. From an old envelope tucked inside the glove compartment, he counted carefully. 20. 40. 60. 100. $180. He smiled. It'll cover a few more lunches. Before driving back to school, he looked at the worn photograph taped to his dashboard. It showed Sarah smiling on a beach years earlier. "I think you'd be happy," he whispered. "I hope I'm keeping my promise." Inside the administration office, only the office manager remained. Daniel looked around to make sure no parents were waiting. He placed the familiar white envelope on the counter. "For the lunch accounts." She smiled. "You're always so kind." He shook his head gently. "It's not kindness." She looked puzzled. "It's a debt." "A debt?" Daniel nodded. "When I was 9 years old, someone fed me. I've been trying to repay that meal ever since." Before she could ask another question, he quietly walked away. Neither of them noticed that the principal's office door had been left slightly open. Victoria had heard every single word. She remained perfectly still until Daniel's footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she slowly walked into the office. "Did he leave another envelope?" The office manager nodded. Victoria carefully opened it. Inside was $180. Folded neatly beside the cash was a handwritten note. It contained only one sentence. "Please make sure no child feels ashamed for being hungry." There was no signature. No name. No request for recognition. Victoria stared at the note for a long time. Finally, she whispered to herself. "It was you." The mystery that had lasted 9 years had finally been solved. But as she looked through Daniel's employment file later that evening, another discovery stopped her cold. According to payroll records, a school janitor earning his modest salary could never have donated nearly $87,000. The numbers simply didn't add up. If Daniel truly was the anonymous donor, where had all that money come from? For the first time, Victoria realized the mystery wasn't over. It had only just begun. Victoria barely slept that night. The payroll records lay open across her dining room table. She had checked them 3 times. Daniel's salary as head custodian was modest. Even with overtime, it was enough to live simply, not enough to anonymously donate nearly $87,000 over 9 years. Unless he had inherited money, or won the lottery, or was quietly receiving help from someone else. None of it fit the man she had come to know over the past few weeks. By morning, she made a decision. She wasn't going to accuse him. She was going to ask him. Respectfully. Daniel was replacing ceiling tiles in the music room when Victoria walked in. "Mr. Brooks?" He climbed down from the ladder with his usual smile. "Good morning, Principal Reynolds. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." She glanced at the stack of fresh ceiling tiles. "You always seem to be fixing something." Daniel chuckled. "I guess broken things have a way of finding me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria held up the folded note. The one that came with the lunch donation. Daniel's smile faded. "So. You know." "I do." He lowered his eyes. "I never wanted anyone to find out. I'm not here to embarrass you." "I know." Victoria hesitated before asking the question that had been troubling her. "I've reviewed the numbers." She spoke gently. "They don't make sense. You've donated far more than someone earning your salary possibly could." Daniel looked out the classroom window toward the playground. Children were laughing. Running. Completely unaware of the conversation taking place inside. After nearly a minute of silence, he finally spoke. "Would you walk with me?" They wandered slowly through the empty football field behind the school. The morning breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Daniel kept his hands inside his jacket pockets. "There was a time," he began quietly, "when Sarah and I dreamed of having children." Victoria listened without interrupting. "We couldn't. After years of trying, doctors told us it wasn't possible." He smiled sadly. So we decided. If we couldn't raise children of our own, we'd spend our lives helping other people's children. Victoria felt a lump rise in her throat. When Sarah became sick, we sold almost everything. The house. The furniture. My truck. We even emptied our retirement savings. She frowned. Then how? Daniel reached into his wallet. Carefully, he removed a faded photograph. It showed him and Sarah standing beside an elderly woman. My grandmother. Margaret Brooks. Victoria waited. When she passed away, she left me one condition in her will. Daniel smiled. She knew me better than anyone. My grandmother wasn't wealthy. She owned a small bakery. The kind where everyone knew your name. When she retired, she sold the business. She invested the money. Nothing extravagant. Just enough. When she died, the investments had grown into something much larger than any of us expected. Victoria nodded slowly. I inherited part of it. But the inheritance came with a handwritten letter. Daniel unfolded another worn piece of paper he carried inside his wallet. The folds were soft from years of being opened. He handed it to Victoria. She read carefully. Dear Danny. If you're reading this, I'm finally with your grandfather again. This money isn't meant to make your life easier. It's meant to make someone else's life better. Promise me you'll never let generosity become something people applaud. Real kindness doesn't ask for witnesses. Feed hungry children. Help struggling families. And if anyone ever thanks you, tell them to thank God for giving you the opportunity. Love always. Grandma Margaret. Victoria lowered the letter. There were tears in her eyes. I've carried that letter every day for 12 years, Daniel said softly. I invested most of what she left. I only used the earnings. I've never touched the principal. So the money keeps helping children. Year. After year. After year. Victoria finally understood. Daniel wasn't secretly wealthy. He had simply refused to spend the inheritance on himself. Instead, he had quietly turned it into an endless stream of hope. I promised 3 people, Daniel said. My 4th grade teacher. My grandmother. And Sarah. I intend to keep every one of those promises. Over the following months, Victoria found herself seeking Daniel's advice more often. Not about maintenance. About people. One afternoon, a new student named Luis refused to speak to anyone. Teachers couldn't reach him. Counselors struggled. Daniel simply sat beside the boy during recess. For 20 minutes, neither of them said a word. Finally, Luis looked up. You aren't going to ask me questions? Daniel smiled. No. I figured if I stayed long enough, you'd ask me one. The boy thought for a second. Were you ever scared? Daniel nodded. Almost every day when I was your age. Luis looked surprised. What did you do? I kept going anyway. That became the first real conversation Luis had with anyone at the school. Within weeks, he was smiling again. Teachers called it remarkable. Daniel called it patience. Word about Daniel's kindness slowly spread among the staff. One teacher began secretly purchasing backpacks for students in need. Another started a weekend food pantry. The school nurse created a clothing closet for emergency situations. Nobody was trying to imitate Daniel. They were simply inspired by him. Kindness had become contagious. Not everyone approved. During a school board budget meeting, one board member frowned as Victoria discussed expanding student support programs. We're educators. Not a charity. Another added. If families become dependent on handouts, where does it end? Victoria remained calm. It ends when children stop being punished for circumstances they didn't create. The room fell silent. But the proposal was tabled. Funding was denied. After the meeting, Victoria apologized to Daniel. "I'm sorry. I thought they'd understand." Daniel smiled gently. Sometimes people have to see compassion before they believe in it. Then came the obstacle no one expected. The district announced a new financial compliance policy. From now on, every anonymous donation over $100 required complete donor identification. No exceptions. The policy was designed to prevent fraud and ensure transparency. It sounded reasonable. But to Daniel, it felt devastating. That Friday, he stood outside the school office holding another white envelope. For the first time in 9 years. He couldn't bring himself to walk inside. Victoria found him standing there. He quietly held up the envelope. "I can't do it." She understood immediately. "They'll need your name." He nodded. "And once people know, it stops being about hungry children. It becomes about me." He looked down at the envelope in his hands. "I made my grandmother a promise." For the first time since she had met him, Victoria saw doubt in Daniel Brooks' eyes. Not because he feared losing recognition. Because he feared losing anonymity. The very thing that had allowed his kindness to remain pure for nearly a decade. Victoria looked at the envelope. Then at Daniel. And in that moment, she made a decision that would test her own career, her integrity, and her commitment to doing what was right. She was determined to find a way to honor both the new policy and the humble man who had spent 9 years proving that the greatest acts of kindness are often the ones no one ever sees. Victoria sat alone in her office long after the school had emptied. The district's new compliance policy lay open on her desk. She had read it at least a dozen times. There it was in black and white. All anonymous donations exceeding $100 must include verified donor identification. No exceptions. No special circumstances. She understood why the rule existed. Schools had to protect themselves from fraud, money laundering, and legal complications. But all she could think about was Daniel standing outside her office with that white envelope in his hands. A man who had spent 9 years avoiding recognition because he believed kindness should never become a performance. She wasn't willing to let bureaucracy erase something so beautiful. There had to be another way. The next morning, Victoria requested a meeting with the district superintendent. At first, the superintendent listened politely. When she finished explaining Daniel's story, he folded his hands. "I admire the man. I truly do. But policies exist for a reason." Victoria nodded. "I agree. I'm not asking for an exception." He looked surprised. "I'm asking for a solution." She explained her idea. Daniel's identity would be documented privately for legal compliance, but only a handful of authorized district officials would have access to the records. His name would never be released publicly, and every future donation would continue to appear simply as Anonymous Community Support Fund. The superintendent leaned back. "It's unconventional. But it satisfies the policy." After a long pause, he smiled. "I think your janitor has earned a little discretion." Victoria let out the breath she'd been holding. When she shared the news with Daniel, he was silent for several seconds. "So, my name stays out of the spotlight?" Victoria smiled. "Only 3 people will ever know." Daniel looked toward Sarah's photograph in his wallet. "I think she'd like that." He reached into his jacket pocket and carefully placed the familiar white envelope on Victoria's desk. "I guess we can keep feeding kids." She laughed through tears. "I guess we can." A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A teacher posted an anonymous message in the staff newsletter. It read, "Someone in this building has quietly reminded us what compassion looks like. We may never know who they are, but they've inspired many of us to do a little more. No names. No details. Just gratitude. Within days, teachers began contributing a few dollars each month to help students in need. The school nurse joined. The librarian joined. Bus drivers volunteered. Even cafeteria workers quietly contributed spare change. Then parents started asking how they could help. Without realizing it, Daniel's quiet example had sparked something much bigger than a single donor. The school established a voluntary community kindness fund. By the end of the first semester, dozens of families had participated. Children who once skipped meals now had full lunch accounts before the school year even began. No assemblies announced it. No plaques were hung. The kindness simply grew. Then came the moment that changed Daniel forever. One chilly November afternoon, he was sweeping autumn leaves outside the front entrance when a young man in a navy blue military uniform approached him. The young man looked familiar. But older. Stronger. More confident. "Mr. Brooks?" Daniel leaned on his broom. "Yes." The young man smiled. "I don't know if you remember me." Daniel studied his face. Then his eyes widened. "Ethan?" The young man laughed. "I was hoping you'd remember." It was Ethan Miller. The little fourth grader who had once pretended he wasn't hungry. The boy Daniel had quietly slipped $5 to years earlier. Except now. He stood tall as a United States Marine. Before Daniel could say another word, Ethan wrapped him in a tight embrace. "You saved me." Daniel smiled gently. "No. You did that yourself." Ethan shook his head. "You don't understand. My mom eventually found another job. I graduated. I earned a scholarship. And every time life got hard, I remembered the man who made sure I never felt ashamed for being hungry." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out an envelope. "I've been waiting a long time to do this." Inside was a cashier's check. $25,000. Daniel immediately tried to hand it back. "I can't accept this." Ethan smiled. "It's not for you. It's for the kids. I've already spoken with the principal. I want to help the next child who's sitting where I once Saturday." Daniel stared at the check. Then at Ethan. Finally, he whispered. "It really does come back around." News of the growing kindness fund spread, not through headlines, but through lives changed. Former students who had once benefited began returning. Some donated books. Others funded field trips. One became a dentist and offered free dental care to children without insurance. Another opened a scholarship for graduating seniors pursuing careers in education. The ripple effect had become impossible to measure. It all traced back to one man who believed that no child should ever feel embarrassed for being hungry. The following spring, Lincoln Elementary celebrated its 50th anniversary. The school board planned to honor outstanding employees. Victoria asked Daniel to attend. He reluctantly agreed. When his name was called, the auditorium erupted into applause. Daniel looked uncomfortable. He accepted a simple certificate and quietly returned to his seat. He thought that was the end of it. Then Victoria stepped back to the microphone. "I promised someone I would protect his privacy." She smiled. "And I intend to keep that promise. So I won't tell you everything he's done." The audience grew silent. "But I will tell you this. For years, this school has been blessed by someone who believes that kindness matters most when no one is watching." She looked toward Daniel. "You have taught this community that character isn't measured by what we receive. It's measured by what we quietly give." The audience stood. Not because they knew the whole story, but because they knew the man. Teachers. Parents. Students. Custodians. Cafeteria workers. Everyone rose to their feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Daniel lowered his head, overwhelmed. Not because he wanted recognition, but because he realized something. People hadn't fallen in love with what he had given. They had fallen in love with the example he had lived. The following Monday morning, Daniel arrived at school at exactly 4:17 a.m., just as he had for years. He unlocked the side entrance, filled his mop bucket, turned on the hallway lights. Nothing about his routine had changed. As he walked past the cafeteria, he noticed something new. Near the register sat a small wooden box with a handwritten sign. Take a meal. Leave hope. No child eats alone. There were no names attached. Just quiet generosity. Daniel smiled. The school no longer depended on one anonymous giver. An entire community had become one. The lonely boy who had once returned his lunch tray because he couldn't afford $6 had unknowingly inspired hundreds of people to make sure no child would ever have to do the same again. This story shows how one act of kindness can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments. Nearly 5 years passed. Lincoln Elementary was no longer known only for its academic excellence. It became known throughout the state for something far more meaningful. No student in the district ever worried about unpaid lunch debt again. The Community Kindness Fund had grown beyond anything Victoria Reynolds could have imagined. Local businesses quietly contributed each year. Retired teachers donated portions of their pensions. Churches organized annual food drives. Former students returned to volunteer. Even neighboring school districts reached out to learn how Lincoln had created a culture where generosity spread naturally instead of being forced. Whenever reporters called asking who had started it all, Victoria always gave the same answer. It wasn't a program. It was a person who believed that kindness should never need applause. She never mentioned Daniel's name. She had made a promise. And she intended to keep it. Daniel Brooks continued arriving at 4:17 every morning. His routine barely changed. He still greeted every child by name. He still repaired broken desks before teachers arrived. He still kept spare mittens in the lost and found every winter. He still carried granola bars in his work cart for children who came to school hungry after difficult mornings at home. To the newest students, he was simply the kind janitor. To those who had known him for years, he was the heart of Lincoln Elementary. One afternoon, a second grader tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Why are you always helping everybody?" Daniel smiled. He knelt so they were eye to eye. "Because someone helped me." The little girl tilted her head. "Did you ever pay them back?" Daniel looked toward the cafeteria. A gentle smile crossed his face. "I've been trying to." Victoria Reynolds also found herself transformed. Before meeting Daniel, success had always been measured by numbers. Higher test scores. Larger budgets. Improved rankings. Now she measured success differently. How many children felt safe enough to smile? How many families believed the school truly cared? How many teachers stayed after hours simply because they loved their students? She often told new principals. The strongest schools aren't built with bricks. They're built with compassion. Daniel had taught her that. Without ever intending to. Ethan Miller kept his promise as well. His $25,000 donation became only the beginning. After completing his military service, he returned home and established an annual scholarship for graduating seniors who planned to become teachers, social workers, nurses, or first responders. Every recipient received a handwritten letter with the scholarship. At the bottom, beneath his signature, were 8 simple words. No child should feel ashamed for being hungry. He never explained the quote. He didn't need to. The ripple effect continued. Luis, the quiet boy who once refused to speak, grew into a confident young man. Inspired by Daniel's patience, he became a child psychologist. Whenever parents asked why he had chosen the profession, he always smiled. One man taught me that sometimes the greatest help isn't advice. It's simply staying. The little girl whose bracelet Daniel had rescued from the mud became an elementary school teacher. Every year on the first day of class, she placed a small silver heart charm on her desk. When students asked about it, she shared the story of the janitor who spent 10 minutes searching through mud because he believed that what mattered to a child should matter to an adult. That lesson shaped her classroom forever. As for Daniel, he never retired as early as everyone expected. People often asked why. He would simply laugh. What would I do? This place keeps me young. Eventually, after nearly 4 decades of serving schools, he agreed to work fewer hours. His replacement was a young custodian named Marcus. On Marcus's first morning, Daniel handed him the old brass key that had opened the side entrance for so many years. "It isn't just a key," Daniel said. "It's a responsibility." Marcus looked confused. Daniel smiled. "You'll understand." A week later, Marcus discovered a small box hidden inside the custodial closet. Inside were gloves, scarves, small toys, notebooks, toothbrushes, and handwritten notes reminding whoever found them where to quietly leave each item so children could discover them without feeling embarrassed. Taped inside the lid was one final message in Daniel's handwriting. "People may forget the floors you cleaned. They will never forget how you made them feel." Marcus carefully closed the lid. He understood. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel stood outside the school watching children race toward the entrance. Backpacks bounced. Shoelaces came untied. Parents waved goodbye. Laughter filled the air. Victoria walked over holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been smiling for 10 minutes. Daniel chuckled. "I was remembering. The lunch tray." He nodded. "I used to think the worst day of my life was the day I couldn't afford lunch." Victoria looked at him curiously. "And now? Now I realize. If that day had never happened, I might never have understood what hungry children feel." He paused. "And if I never understood, I might never have spent my life trying to change it." Victoria smiled. "Funny how pain can become purpose." Daniel nodded slowly. "It can. If we let it." This story isn't based on one single person. But it is inspired by countless quiet heroes who choose compassion over recognition every single day. Across the world, there are custodians who buy winter coats for students. Teachers who keep extra snacks in their desks. Cafeteria workers who quietly cover the cost of a child's meal. Bus drivers who notice when someone is hurting. Neighbors who help without expecting gratitude. Their names may never appear in newspapers. They may never receive awards. But they change lives in ways that statistics can never measure. Because the greatest acts of kindness are often the ones no one sees. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us. If this touched your heart, please like this video. It helps more people discover these inspiring stories. Subscribe for more tales of human kindness that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for opportunities in your own life to be someone's unexpected blessing. Maybe it's paying for someone's meal. Maybe it's encouraging a struggling student. Maybe it's simply noticing the person everyone else overlooks. Never underestimate what one quiet act of compassion can become. A single meal can restore dignity. A single conversation can restore hope. A single act of kindness can echo through generations. So here's one final question before you go. What act of kindness will you perform this week? Share your commitment in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to do the same. Thank you for watching, and remember, you have the power to change someone's entire world.